Well, good morning, everybody. Abby, can you hear us?
Good morning. I can hear you.
Thank you, Abby. Let's go ahead and get started. We need roll call, please, Jen.
Mike Delson,
I'm here.
Tom McDonald,
Here.
Jennifer Finley, Jim Molitor, Carol Langford, Danielle Matt,
Here.
Big Matt, James Steele Jr.,
Una.
Martin Charlo,
Present.
Len Tooteeth, Lanice Trahan.
Thank you, Jen. Martin, can you give us a prayer?
Creator today, we're thankful for the day, the family we got, the friends we have. Prayers for all the people that we affect, all of our police and lawyers and all the people that help the less fortunate. Pray for our family who are struggling with addiction, mental health issues. Prayers for the weather, thankful for everything kind of filling up, greening up. Prayers for all of our friends, all of our enemies, and everyone in between.
Thank you, Martin. We have minutes from June 6th. If we can take a quick look at them. Go.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I made some corrections and I sent them to Abby already. On page 1, I had her insert a native veteran from Maine and just remove all major allies of World War II at the event. And then the next line discussed an issue regarding Homer Corville and his family. And then at the end, and his family, and let his family, Homer and his family know the status. And then later in the minutes, scroll down, page 7 of 10, I just correction of Jeannie Christopher, put a H in there. And those are my corrections. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Go ahead, Len.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the council. So in the part of the minutes where Greg Spar is discussing the hiring of the 2 positions, at the very end of that paragraph, I would like to add that Len strongly opposes this action and would like further discussion.
Anything else? Motion to accept the minutes by Martin with the second amendments, second by James, all in favor? Tom abstains, 8-4. Oh, Jennifer abstains as well, so 7-4 and 2 abstentions. We do have an agenda for today. Are there items for the agenda? James, Bing? Martin? Danielle? one walk-in. Okay, a motion. Motion by Tom to accept the agenda with additions. Jimmy second. All in favor? Unanimous. Go ahead and go to our walk-in. Gary,
And she wanted executive.
we'll go out of regular into executive. So you've got the resolution. Can you read the title of the resolution that, as we do these?
Yes.
Chastity, and can you send those to Abby in Word? Because I never received your resolutions.
Yep, we will get them to you guys. They're on my desk as we speak. So resolution to approve for CSA for enrollment through DNA.
I would, motion.
Motion?
Motion by Tom, second by Jennifer. All in favor? 8-4, Len out of the room. Next one.
Okay. Resolution to approve CAB for enrollment.
Motion by Jennifer, second by Danielle. All in favor? 8-4, Len out of the room.
Resolution to approve MRA or MRF for enrollment.
Motion by Jennifer. Second by Danielle. All in favor? 8-4, Len out of the room.
Resolution to approve ADH blood correction.
Motion by Tom, second by Martin. All in favor? 8-4, Len out of the room.
Resolution to approve SLO blood correction.
Motion by Jennifer. Second by Tom, all in favor? 8-4, Len out of the room.
That is it.
Thank you, Chastity.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Arlen.
Thank you.
Did you guys want a quick break?
Yep, quick break. 5 minutes. And we got Mike Wheeler, Belden Greg.
We'll move into executive.
Come on up. I'll just give a quick intro here on the issue. I believe Chelsea's on with us as well. Thanks, council. This is the EPA from the Columbia Falls site and the Smurfit site. They've got a presentation here. You can use your mouse and you can just use to scroll down here. These will be the packet page numbers here, right there. If you want to reference to them, they can have it on their screen. This will also be on there. So I'll let the EPA folks introduce themselves. I know Ally and a couple of other folks, but they're here to talk about, give updates on Columbia Falls and Smurfit. So appreciate them being here, and I'll let them introduce themselves, and I'll step back. Thanks. When you want to speak, you just hit this.
Sounds good.
Well, welcome, everybody.
Thank you. My name's Ally Archer. I'm the remedial project manager for EPA on the Smurfit Stone site. And I'm going to give my presentation first, but I was going to let the rest of the group introduce themselves, and then they'll continue on with CFAC. So there you go.
Hi, my name is Mackenzie Meter. I'm the Community Involvement Coordinator on the Smurfit site and supporting a few other sites around Montana as well. Thank you for having us here today.
Yeah, Matt Dorrington. I'm a project manager for EPA. I've been at the Columbia Falls aluminum site as a project manager there for a little over a year. And with EPA about the same amount of time. My office is out of Helena, and thanks for having us.
Hi, my name's Gunnar Elmelson. I'm with CDM Smith. We're technical contractors to EPA on the CFAC site, and I've been working on the site for 7 years now.
Hi, I'm Dana Barnacote, EPA. I work with Matt on CFAC. So I'm the Community Involvement Coordinator, and thank you very much for having us here today.
All right, looks like back to me. We're going to start on slide 61 in the packet and give an update on the Smurfit Stone super fun site. Just figure out this mouse. There we go. All right, so today I'm going to cover just briefly the Superfund process, the Frenchtown Mill operational history, a site timeline, an update on sampling at the site, the risk assessments, and then discuss the additional sampling requests and next steps, and then we should have plenty of time for questions. So I like to start with the origin of Superfund, just because it's a term we use frequently in our day-to-day jobs and at our public meetings, and to really center in on what that means and why it's important to understand Superfund. Superfund is the nickname given to the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, also called CERCLA. CERCLA is the law that provided the Environmental Protection Agency the authority and funding to respond to releases of hazardous threats. The National Oil and Hazardous Substance Pollution Contingency Plan, or the NCP, is the set of guidelines that sets out the authorities and regulations that we perform our jobs by. So if you look in the NCP, you can see how my job is defined, for example, what the job of a remedial project manager is, what the steps are to investigate and address hazardous waste sites, how we're required to coordinate with natural resource trustees and tribal representatives on sites. And so the NCP really sets out our guidelines, and then CERCLA, or Superfund, is the law that gave us the authority to require companies to clean up sites and to request funding to clean up those sites or reimburse the government for cleaning up those sites. This all started as a response to hazardous waste that was found in the Love Canal area way back in the 1980s. And we've been rolling under Superfund since, with different changes in representation and funding. But we've seen an increase in funding recently, and therefore have a more staffed up office in Helena and a lot more support to address these sites. So the Superfund process is also defined in the NCP, and it sets out this kind of Superfund roadmap, where we first begin with the preliminary assessment and site inspection. Then a site is proposed to the Superfund, and that's when our office really shows up and begins the remedial investigation and risk assessment phase. We then look at what and where are the risks on site. The feasibility study is how it can be cleaned up. We then issue a proposed plan, which is the official public comment period, where we look at how does the community, how does the state, think about this cleanup? Are they accepting it? What are some things that we need to consider? Once we issue a proposed plan, we'll do a record of decision, which is the legal, scientific, public document that details the cleanup. We then go into the design of the cleanup, the action of the cleanup, and then operation and maintenance. So this is our long roadmap to get us through the Superfund process and address hazardous waste sites. Something that all cleanups are required to address is to protect human health and the environment. And that's where our risk assessments come into play, as we're looking at what is unacceptable risk on this site currently and in the future to both human health and the environment. And they have to meet all federal and state requirements and regulations, and that's the ARARs, the applicable or relevant and appropriate requirements. So DEQ 7 water standards, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the council. I just, in regards to your last statement, do you take into consideration the tribe's values on this Aboriginal property, on how this, on our Aboriginal land, on how this needs to be cleaned up?
Yeah, I think it can come into play in a lot of different areas, and I'll just speak to Smurfit and how we've interacted on the Smurfit site. Since we're in the investigation phase, we worked with our tribal council back in 2019 to look at tribal consumption rates and how does CSKT use the Clark Fork River, its surrounding area, and make sure we factored in protective measures specific to this region and its tribes to make sure that we were protective to that. So that's how you can incorporate and coordinate with tribes during the risk assessment phase. I think during remedial design and cleanup, we look at traditional ecological knowledge and are there ways that we can better address this cleanup action. So EPA really tries to work with, we don't want to recreate the wheel, look at areas that we have folks that have more information that we do and incorporate into that, our Superfund process. And I'll talk about that a little more during the risk assessment slide. That's a good question. And please interrupt me with questions as you guys have them, or this is, more for providing information. So if something sounds more interesting or you want me to slow down, just let me know. All right, I'm going to move on to, so now we've talked about what is Superfund, what is the Superfund process, and I want to bring Smurfit into that. And so I'm going to start with the operational history and then kind of bring you back to present. So this mill first began operating in 1957. It operated until 2010. This mill was a kraft paper and pulp mill, and it mostly produced liner board for corrugated containers, but it also used the bleaching process for about 40 years there. And so we have contaminants related to bleaching that we're looking at on the site. This is an image of the mill, and so you can see it was a really extensive property. It was over 3,000 acres. It did everything from chipping to digesting to paper making, and then treated all of the wastewater out on site adjacent to the industrial area. During the main operational time, over 15 million gallons of wastewater were produced per day. I'm going to talk you through that wastewater process. Next. So this is up till so the mill closed in 2010. This image is from when EPA first responded to the site in 2011, 2012, and that was during our preliminary assessment and site investigation. So EPA does more of a desktop research process first, where we look at what investigations have occurred on site, what potential chemicals were used on site, where could those chemicals have been located? Were there hydraulic oil storage areas? Were there spills? Were there landfills? Were there barrels? Do we have former employees we can interview? So we really do our homework before we even show up on site, looking at where can we find contamination? Where do we think it could be located? And kind of build out our investigation from there. So this image was used to really highlight areas on site or site features that we were really concerned about. So we have the industrial area with different staging areas, the color removal plant, and then we have all of the wastewater treatment system broken out. So all of the sludge ponds are highlighted in one color. We have the landfills in yellow, and then the holding water treatment ponds are in blue in the surrounding areas. And so this was used to really better understand the system. And then I have a box to the left that describes where within the solid waste basins, we had different types of landfill material disposed of there. So you can see in one of the landfills, solid waste basin A is what it's referred to in our investigation, but in landfill, it's called landfill A. You have general refuse. So you're looking at just general waste associated with a large industry there. It's paper, plastic, scrap metal, wood, glass, food. So we're able to kind of document in landfill G, we had more of wood yard waste, different wastes going to different areas so that we can really target our sampling to better understand the site. I'm going to go on to the next slide. So this is breaking out the site timeline. As we talked about, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Reduce the screen a little bit to get the whole screen on.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was the same for you guys. I can't see the whole screen. Okay, I'll go back up so you can see the table.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was like, it's not showing. Yeah, so the landfills were used for different uses to support, you know, reducing waste within the industrial area, but taking it out into the surrounding fields to discard wood yard waste and spoils, sludge, and then just the miscellaneous waste associated with running the big operation. And so that's before we've even kind of collected data on the site. We're kind of documenting where things were located. So in 2010, we have the closure. 2011 was where that figure on the previous slide came from. Smurfit was proposed to the NPL, the National Priorities List, in 2013. And then in 2015, EPA entered into an administrative settlement agreement and order on consent to begin the remedial investigation and feasibility study. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that agreement on the next slide. In 2015, the EPA Helena office began the remedial investigation, and this investigation has incurred 13 different addendum to that original work plan, and we're going to talk about those different sampling events and how they supported the risk assessment and looking for waste on site. And then we're going to end this discussion with talking about the request for additional sampling and where we're at currently with planned sampling events. My next slide hones in on that Superfund agreement. So this is the Administrative Settlement Agreement and Order on Consent, or the AOC, and that gives EPA the authority to require companies to investigate and address contamination on site. Any threat to the public health, welfare, or the environment caused by the release or threatened release of hazardous substances, pollutants, or contaminants, by conducting a remedial investigation and feasibility study, and that this work will be consistent with CERCLA, Superfund, the National Contingency Plan, and all applicable EPA guidance documents, policies, and procedures. And at Smurfit, we have 3 responsible parties that entered into this agreement. 2 are former paper mill operators, International Paper and Westrock. And then M2 Green is a redevelopment company that also is a signatory to the AOC. So those are the companies that I work with every day to provide oversight and require to go out and sample the site. One of the first things that EPA does during a remedial investigation is divide the site up into more manageable, operable units. So you have a really big site like Smurfit, you're going to divide it up so you can address those areas individually. Operable Unit 1 is in the lighter yellow. These colors aren't great at defining, but they're the surrounding agricultural areas to the east of the pink industrial area, and they're about 1,200 acres. The pink is the former industrial area, and then I'll make it small, a little smaller. Operable Unit 3 is the former wastewater treatment ponds, and it also has anywhere in the Clark Fork where contamination comes to lie. So we don't draw the site boundary during the investigation because we're looking at where is contamination and where is it moving. So we have a really broad description of the site boundary. We're basically saying wherever we find contamination that's site related, then we'll draw the site boundary. So it's wide open at this point, but we're starting at the source, which is the industrial and wastewater treatment system. And here is what was sampled for in each of the different media within those operable units. So in the agricultural lands, we looked at surface soil and subsurface soil and groundwater. And we analyzed for dioxins, furans, which are associated with the bleaching process, polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs, which would be associated with any hydraulic spills on site, heavy metals, which naturally come from the tree bark, and there are different processes that occurred on site, and then volatile organics and semi-volatile organics. And the core industrial footprint, we looked in soil, groundwater, and we have surface water. So there are 2 streams, Laval Creek and O'Keefe Creek, that run through the site. So we're also sampling in the surface water. We looked for the same suite of analytes, dioxin, furans, PCBs, metals, and VOCs and SVOCs. And then in the wastewater treatment areas, we investigated both upland and, it says upload, but upland and floodplain soils, groundwater, and then we looked in the sediment. and surface water, and then fish tissue as well. And we added on mercury and selenium as being really contaminants that are sensitive to benthic aquatic species for analyzing in those areas. All of this sampling, which occurred from 2015 and is ongoing, so the last 9 years, gets put into our conceptual site model. And this is how we build our understanding of both the site movement of groundwater, surface water, and contaminants. And so this is a kind of a cake cutout of how we know water moves through the system. It's moving from the industrial area out through the wastewater treatment parts and entering the Clark Fork River. We know that we have 3 different units of groundwater. We have a unit 1 shallow water, a unit 2 semi-confining unit, and then a deep aquifer, which is the protected aquifer in Missoula. And it's just a good visual of where we have the 100-year floodplain, which is the solid blue line on the site, and the different berms. This is a more discrete cutout where we're looking at more specifics. And so you can see different wells that are sunk in here. We have over 900 groundwater samples on the site, so it's a really well understood part of the site. We know that we have elevated manganese and arsenic that are residuals from the pulp process that, due to site conditions, are becoming more available in the shallow aquifer and moving toward the river. So the shallow aquifer is an area of the site that we know has unacceptable risk, and we want to better understand its impacts to the Clark Fork River for those contaminants, manganese and arsenic. We have wells down gradient of potential source areas. So if you see in the industrial area, I guess I can use the mouse, this industrial area with the buildings, we purposely placed groundwater monitoring wells down gradient of the industrial areas, of our sludge ponds and landfills, to make sure that as we move toward the river, we're capturing any contamination that might be leaving those source areas and making their way toward the river. And it also shows the different depths to the aquifer units again. So this all feeds into our risk assessments. And as I said earlier, these are really our basis for taking action on a site. So if EPA identifies that there's unacceptable risk, that means we move forward with looking at different cleanup actions that we can do to address that risk. And that's where our authority comes from within CERCLA and the NCP is EPA can take action when we have unacceptable risk identified. So there are 3 risk assessments that occurred at Smurfit that are accessible on our website. And then we have fact sheets on the back table as well. But we're looking at hypothetical future residents. And we do have elevated dioxin furans in pond 17, which is one of the primary sludge ponds. And it's elevated for future residents in surface soil. For future residents and workers, as I spoke to earlier, the shallow aquifer groundwater exceeds a level of concern for manganese and arsenic. And then for aquatic receptors, and this was largely through the help of CSKT, we identified the consumption of northern pike that exceeds a level of concern. And then for tribal fishers, the consumption of fillet and whole body of northern pike and rainbow trout exceed level of concern. And this kind of also builds with the Fish Wildlife Park's fish consumption advisory that was issued for a 148-mile stretch of the Clark Fork River that extends from 30 miles upstream of the Smurfit Stone site of Missoula to 100 miles downstream, and that's for all species of fish. The Superfund process is, again, highlighted here below. So first we look at, is there a problem? Where the yellow star is now, we're looking at what and where are the risks on site. We have identified unacceptable risk at Smurfit. So the next phase we'll be looking at how can we clean that up? And then we'll eventually issue a proposed plan and begin that cleanup action. I do want to talk about an additional sampling request that the community of Frenchtown and Missoula County stakeholders made to EPA to conduct additional studies to better characterize the sludge, the wastewater pathway, and groundwater, and then build into Clark Fork River sampling. And so these are studies that are in conjunction with additional studies outside of the Superfund site to better understand the Clark Fork River and the different impacts that that river has from both heavy metal mining upstream and all the industry that has kind of hounded that river for decades, ending at the Smurfit Stone site. So this sampling request was made in 2023. And so we're implementing that additional sampling over the next couple years. Last fall, we sampled a fuller suite of wells looking at PCBs and dioxin furans, and addendum 12 is to better address the request for quarterly sampling from stakeholders. So we're getting out doing quarterly groundwater sampling. And drilling additional wells, drilling additional boreholes in the primary sludge ponds to really support the stakeholders' concern about a lack of characterization. And then in 2024, the fall, we're looking at wastewater pathway sampling. This is an image on the slide from this past spring where we were out in the sludge ponds, drilling additional boreholes to look at waste material and if we have contaminants leaving that waste material in the ponds. I can't talk about Smurfit without talking about our berms out there. Mackenzie and I were doing a berm survey earlier today, so we came from the site. Every high flow season, so starting in April, we do monthly berm inspections. The berms have been sampled and they have a contingency plan for them, and then ultimately what happens to the berms will be decided in the record of decision at that cleanup decision phase. But we do have a contingency plan in place to make sure that we're inspecting them and that we have response actions for any hint of stability concerns during high flow or flooding. This plan is available on our website, but we look at current conditions and we're out there monthly unless we have triggers of weekly inspections or daily inspections based on the gauge stations below Missoula that impact the site. This year, we've just had to have monthly berm inspections because it hasn't been a really high flow year, and everything's looking pretty normal out there. But if need be, we can respond to stability issues out on site. And with that, I have time for questions.
Go ahead, Len.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the council, and thank you for the presentation. Yeah, it was very educational. Just a rhetoric question. If the tribes chose to go the route of seeking a monetary resource damage for our Aboriginal territory here, is this science going to support the fact that this will never ever be restored to its natural habitat?
So I think the science that we're doing right now would support the claim that it's been negatively impacted. And then I'm not sure what data would need to be collected to have like a long-term restoration piece of that. Because I know we have the Natural Resource Damages Program who's also looking at an assessment claim. And I think their goal is to come in after the cleanup to do restoration activities on the site. So I think it would be a
That's
piece
a tough
of,
question to answer, so I just wanted to throw that out there to get you thinking.
yeah.
Just because that may be the direction the tribes choose to go. So,
Yeah, and our data is available to support, I think if you want to talk more about that and how you can access data or what kind of data you would need, that's always welcomed.
okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah.
Green, then Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was looking at these signs here, everything's Smurfit stone on them. And I was wondering what happened to Horner Waldorf and Champion.
Yeah.
They were involved here too, because I used to work for Horner Waldorf.
Yes.
Back in the day, so I was just wondering what happened to them with this suit.
They were bought up by West Rock or International Paper at some point. So they're in our like historical chain of companies. But I think the two companies that are financially viable to address this were International Paper and West Rock. So they were a part of it, but I think they went bankrupt along the way and weren't financially viable to support the Superfund process. Yeah.
Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ellie, for a good presentation. Just a couple of questions. What else was, as far as the living creatures were sampled?
Yeah, that's a good question. So long-nosed dace were out in there. We did benthics in the creeks and we did mammals on the site. So a variety size of mammals were collected, I think mice mostly. And then we went from long-nosed dace, benthics to long-nosed dace to northern pike and rainbow trout.
One of the interesting studies in my career that came out was by the Yellow Bay Biological Station, talking about, like salmon flies and how far insects or invertebrates are down into the riverbed. And they were sampling life history at 50 feet down.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about this kind of pollution, potential pollution, at least, how do you provide a remedy to that if that's been lost?
Yeah, so I think EPA, we look at like what are the current impacts and we can address the current risks on site. So we'll look at like what are the levels in the sediment? How are they impacting flies and anything that eats those flies up the food chain. And we have like the risk assessors who can model all of those impacts up in a really conservative way. So if we're seeing this level in the pore water, in the sediments, in the surface water, how much can it impact up the food chain? And we can base our required cleanup on that current condition. And then I think it's more of a restoration or a loss of that historic habitat where natural resource damages or tribal resource damages would come in, but our authority is limited to addressing current risk for current uses or future hypothetical uses, but we can do that in a really conservative, protective way by modeling impacts across the food chain.
Other questions?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate the overview. Earlier, I kind of was confused about one of my comments. I didn't realize this presentation was looking at the example of down in Missoula and then, kind of looking at what's going on up north. But I think the important thing to remember, and I appreciate you all's consideration, is it is the whole western side of Montana is Aboriginal territory, ceded land that the tribes, back in treaty days. And so it's important that our views are considered. Be mindful. We have, the three chiefs here representing three different tribes. And, I remember being on the foundation, SKC foundation staff, and we went up to Kalispell for a meeting and with the foundation up there. And one of the folks up there was shocked that the name Kalispell was the name of an Indian tribe. They were just completely over their head. You're either willfully ignorant or what? Or passively ignorant, whatever you want to apply. It just seems that as we deal with Flathead County, it's named for an Indian tribe, but we have so many folks in that area that are just absolutely whatever you want to apply. But if you put an Indian tribe to it, why are they involved? What do they have to do with this? And I used to sit on the advisory council for the Upper Clark Fork Restoration Council back in the 06 days and 10. And some of the fellow board members of that weren't too keen on the tribes being involved. And I just took the opportunity to kind of poke them and remind them why it was important for us to be involved. And so, the vice chairman mentioned earlier, as we were talking with some of our staff, this is the headwaters of the Flathead that affects the lake, affects all the way on down. And so it's an important area for us in that regard. We put a lot of effort into making sure that the Flathead Lake is clean as best as we can. It was, I believe, the tribes that led the effort to get after all of everybody's sewage that was going into the lake years ago. And so that's still an ongoing battle to make sure that is stays that way. But I think with the efforts up there, I think my bigger concern is, the main company has a different track record internationally than Stone Container does. I'll just put it out bluntly. I could look on the internet really quickly and find out the negative news articles about Stone Container being drugged through court and Glencore, and I can find it internationally, the things that they've done. And so when you go to trusting partners, Stone Container from my council colleagues have indicated they've been willing to work with the process and try to figure things out in a proactive manner. And I think that's a good thing.
Mhm.
And, but with the other company, it just, if I can just quickly while we're talking and search the internet and find, you know,
Yeah, not great.
UK bribery charges in Africa, the US justice system bribery charges in South America and Central and South America.
Mhm.
And these aren't just fly by night news organizations, you know, it's
Mhm.
Financial Times, it's BBC, it's those kind of things. I think that's a good thing for Stone Container in that regard, to at least, you know, have all that. Your PR folks don't have all that to deal with. But it does give me pause when, you know, the vice chairman's brought that up constantly, the actions of Glencore internationally, and I hadn't really put it until I just did my own little cursory research, and
Mhm.
it's pretty significant that the things that that company has done to get their way in parts of the world that they don't have a voice. You know, they're relying on, you know, Western companies to help them, and here we have the negativity. And so, you know, I'm hoping in this relationship as we look up to the Flathead County area and up the north, you know, I there's some things about the presentation I like, and there's some things I'm like, but I know that's with anything as well. But the big thing is just remember that the tribes are at the table for a reason. It predates the state of Montana. It predates the country. It predates the US and Canada.
Mhm.
And definitely predates the counties. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that comment. And I do want to say that the tribes have been a great part of this process at Smurfit. Ever since I came on in 2019, Mary Price was a really vocal advocate for the tribes, and then John has been a constant present as well. And we do coordinate with the Kalispel tribe as they're downstream of the site as well. And I just want to, thank the involvement that CSKT has been able to have in an early phase. I think EPA never wants to get to that position where we don't have an idea of what the community or the tribes would like to see, or their input, or how they're using the site from a consumption or recreational perspective, and or historical, or so I think those are all things that are where we're at in Smurfit are really important to build into. And the CSKT has an active presence on our Frenchtown Working Group, which is made up of just key natural resource trustees, the county, the tribes, excuse me. And we meet once a month. And so they've been involved in all of these. It's their, meetings amongst just those state, federal, tribal, technical, scientific minds, and we can really discuss what's happening ongoing. And so that's been a really great part of a change we've had in the last year at Smurfit, is getting together every month and discussing upcoming concerns, what we see for the future of the site, what we would like to see for the future of the site. And so it's a constant conversation. I think CSKT is well represented in that and been a really active role at Smurfit.
Real quick follow-up, just if I may, Mr. Chair, just a point to make on listening sessions in the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
The federal government, with Indian tribes in particular, is good at listening sessions,
Mm-hmm.
but then when it comes to action sessions,
Mm-hmm.
I think, my experience, at least with EPA, and some of that's come through court battles.
Mm-hmm.
EPA hasn't always been, it's a great organization, but sometimes we've had to go to court, and like ARCO and all those kind of things. But
Mm-hmm.
but the big thing is listening session and hearing what the tribes are saying and acting upon that.
Yeah, very fair. And I agree. I don't know that listening sessions are the most productive. These are like working groups. And so we're sharing data, talking about next steps. And so I'm not a big fan of listening sessions either, but I think being able to actively participate as really involved, long-term involved members of the Smurfit site. So those are ongoing with EPA, kind of chairing them, but definitely a lot of input from all members. Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, there's been some great involvement. The thing that really worries me about the Smurfit Stone site is, and you can see it. I mean, you guys all know it. I mean, this is all carved out in a historic floodplain. I mean, an active floodplain.
Mhm.
And, there's no normal anymore. I don't know what to expect next year. We could have a 500-year flood event next year.
Mhm.
Could even have it this year, for far as I know. It's just such wild weather.
Mhm.
So I think, a lot of the folks that I talk to, the deepest concern is, get it done.
Right.
And because, the clock's ticking, the odds are against us,
Mhm.
and expedite it, as appropriately as possible. That's the key thing, at
Mhm.
least in my vision. But, because I remember the 64 flood, and I looked directly at that Yellowstone flood a few years ago, and it's incredible. It's so powerful.
Mhm.
And, I could see it coming in the Clark Fork system,
Mhm.
and, just blow this whole thing wide open. And then we have an even bigger mess. So, I just encourage EPA to get it done.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay.
Every spring, I'm like, we gotta make movement. So, yeah, I think, we want to get it right. And I think that's where stakeholders they wanted additional characterization. And I think we're getting all that data in. And I think things are really moving where we can hope to see progress in the next couple of years. So I hear you, and I'll make sure that gets back to my boss too.
I'd love to hear how you actually established the 30 miles upstream and 100 miles downstream.
Yeah, that's a Fish Wildlife Parks study. We looked, like fish being mobile, we looked more adjacent and kind of mirrored, I think, where we saw use of it. But the Fish Wildlife Parks Fish Consumption Advisory, I think they collected fish in those areas and they made that determination. But they have a really wide scope of work where they're looking at the Flathead, the Bitterroot, the Blackfoot, the Clark Fork, and they were able to, in their process, make that protective restriction. But I would defer to them on how exactly they came up with that number.
It was just the other day, we had folks in here from up the Blackfeet, I think it was, talking about fish from Thompson Falls. How do you tell?
I know. Yeah, they move a lot.
Other questions for Ally? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, Mr. Chair, members of the council, thanks for the opportunity to visit with you today. I've got some slides here, maybe, or is that the end of this one?
It might be.
Nope.
Jen, was that all the slides in our
Only if it's
packet?
above mine?
That was all our slides in the packet.
Sure.
Yeah, because I started on 60.
Yep, there it is.
Thank you.
Somebody's got it. Thanks for that. Okay. I was in Columbia Falls, April 24th and 25th. We did a 2-day open house event with community meetings in the evenings. And during that time, one of the open houses, I was approached by one of the tribal's attorneys. I can't remember the gentleman's name.
Ryan Nushin.
Ryan. I wanted to say Ryan, but I didn't want to get it wrong. And he and I had a good 20-minute conversation. We walked through a number of slides. We talked through a history of the site. Work's been going on here for, at least under the EPA's direction, for about 8 years now. And it was in that meeting that he suggested that we come here today and give you an update. I come to you today realizing I'm giving you an update on 8 years of work. So I've tried to pare this down. I'm going to hit it at a pretty high level. But let me first say this is certainly could be one of many more engagements. If you have additional follow-up, I'm happy to come here at any time and provide more details. So I'm limited to a few slides in 20 minutes. So I'm going to hit the highlights and save plenty of time for your questions. But So I just wanted to provide that caveat before I start. A lot of just listening to the Ally's presentation, there are similarities here, obviously, with another industrial site near a river in Montana. The Anaconda aluminum site was located just north of the Flathead River outside of Columbia Falls. So let me get into the presentation here. Somebody else is driving, is that right? Should be okay? There we go. Okay, this is just a bit of an outline of what I want to cover. Again, this is an aluminum smelter that was active from 1955 to 2009. EPA listed the site on the national priorities list in 2016. Two main PRPs at the site, Glencore's Mr. Steele mentioned, and also Atlantic Richfield. The environmental justice screen, which the process EPA uses, was conducted at the site. There are no major issues or concerns with environmental justice. Montana's Natural Resource Damage Program, I understand their partner with you as a trustee, have indicated to the PRP and to the agencies their intent to conduct a pre-assessment for a natural damage claim, which I think you all are aware of. And there are no principal threat waste. Principal threat waste is a highly mobile, highly toxic waste that requires special treatment. So there is no principal waste at this site. This is a bit of the timeline. We talked about it operating from 1955 to 2009. In this timeline, I think it's important to know, we'll talk a little bit about spent pot liner. That's a byproduct, if you will, or a product of aluminum smelting that contains fluoride and cyanide. Up until 1988, most aluminum smelters in the Northwest landfilled the spent pot liner on site. That was a normal practice until 1988, when it was listed as a RCRA hazardous waste by the EPA and required special transport, treatment, and storage at a RCRA facility. The nearest RCRA facility to us is about 500 miles away in Oregon, just for reference. We'll get to that. After 1988, when spent pot liner was moved from the process, it was put on a rail car and then transferred to a controlled hazardous waste site, so outside the state. Other key dates, we talked about the listing. There was a time critical removal action that was conducted in the riparian area, so just to the south of the site, right next to the Flathead River. They were using that as a percolation pond. It was part of the process. The soils in that area contain high levels of barium. Under an administrative order, Glencore conducted a removal action, removing all the contaminated soils from the riparian area. The risk there was that as the river does, it changes path. They thought it had the potential risk to entrain those soils and contaminate the river. So that removal action was completed in 2021, and it's worth noting. The feasibility study was completed in 2021. Last year, EPA released its proposed plan. So once the remedial investigation is conducted, again, which determines the extent and the nature of contaminants on site, what types of contaminants are there, where are they, what levels do they exist, feasibility study, which then develops a range of alternatives for cleanup. EPA evaluates all that data and then develops its own proposed plan for cleanup. So it's the proposed remedy at the site. That was released back in June of last year. It triggered a 90-day public comment period, which ended at the end of August. The agency received a lot of really good feedback at that time, 700 plus comments on the proposed plan that we've since developed with working closely with our contractor, responses to those comments. So a lot of information there. Let's see. I talked a bit about the PRPs. I talked a bit about the time critical removal. Of note, separately, CFAC and ARCO have worked out issues in court over financial responsibility. CFAC has been the primary agent or the primary company working, PRP working with the agencies. ARCO's kind of been in the background, but separately they did negotiate through litigation. There is a 65-35 split for financial accountability. And so ARCO's on the hook for 35% of the cost. Bit about the site. So obviously it's inactive. The industrial area, which you see in the background there, was most of the buildings were removed years ago. And all that's left is a large concrete footprint. There's a few buildings remaining. The property owner does contract with some local construction companies who use the buildings to store their equipment, but that's the extent of the use of the site. It's fenced and access is restricted. Talk about that. Just Ally had shared this kind of timeline. This is just another view of the overall Superfund process. I talked about the remedial investigation feasibility study. You know, that's the kind of the characterization part of the site. Selection of the remedy, which involves release of the proposed plan, which I talked about. And then since then, we have been working on a record of decision. So it's taking into account feedback on the proposed plan from the community, making changes if we need to that remedy, and then memorializing that in a record of decision, which is what we'll refer to as the selected remedy. Now, the record of decision has not been issued yet. We still are working on that, and it has not been signed. So that's where we're at in the process. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Has EPA considered filing a bad actor claim on a site like this? That's something that's been discussed?
Not that I'm familiar with, no. But one of the questions we get a lot about, and I think it was mentioned earlier, we brought some fact sheets with us. So I want to leave those with you. What came out of that 90-day public comment period was, and the really good feedback was, I'd say some emerging themes. Right, we get a lot of the same questions again and again. The community engagement we did in April, getting similar feedback, similar concerns, and so we've taken some of those really recurring themes and developed fact sheets around them. I'm going to leave those with you today. Hopefully you've got time to read it. I think a lot of the same folks had the same question, right? And one of them is reuse. And we've just developed a new fact sheet about reuse and redevelopment. What do you do with a Superfund site once it's cleaned up afterwards, right? And who's involved in making those decisions? And really, it's with input from the community, local governments, tribal input, I think, is important as well. And this is a private site, but I think the owner is open to feedback, and we're actually working now with a potential developer who may be interested in purchasing some of the site and surrounding areas. And so it's working with all those folks and in concert and developing kind of an informed plan that they can then put up in front of the community. So just a bit about risks. Ally mentioned a lot of risks, during the remedial investigation. As any site, there's a human health and risk assessment, or human health and ecological risk assessment. The main impact here from that spent potliner is the groundwater. There's a groundwater plume that goes beneath the spent potliner, which is landfilled, and it's making contact, and it's taking the cyanide and it's moving it towards the Flathead River. Through many well samples over the course of a couple years, we've tried to characterize that plume. What does it look like? What happens to the cyanide concentrations as it gets to the river? And through modeling and characterization, what we're seeing is about when that plume makes it to the riparian area and then expresses itself as surface water, the concentrations of cyanide are below the DEQ-7 drinking water standard. So right now, there's a natural attenuation that occurs. That's, again, and Ally mentioned this, is our mission under Superfund is to characterize the current existing risks at the site, identify the ones that are unacceptable to human health and the environment, and then implement a remedy that cleans that up and removes all those risks. So when folks ask me about the current impact of the site, there's no waste leaving that 1,300 acre site, including impacts to the river. In fact, in the last 3 years, they've not, through routine sampling, particularly in the spring where you see most runoff, that surface water is not expressing at the river. It's not making it to the river for whatever reason. But we'll continue to monitor it. So, but then that's a lead in a bit to the remedy. When I get to the remedy, to say, how do we prevent that from ever happening in the future? We'll talk about that in EPA's proposed remedy. Oops. Okay, this is a bit of a picture. This is a slide from Columbia Falls, CFAC, the company. They used this as a communication when they were talking about a prospective purchaser approaching them and interested in buying roughly 2,400 acres. So the north of the river there, so it would include this purple triangle, which is the site boundary, and then some of the lighter brownish yellows squares are additional acreage outside the site. It's that 2,400 acres, that broader area to the north, that the prospective purchaser is interested in buying.
Matt, where was that pond you said was cleaned up?
The riparian area, I think it's better seen on the next one. So down here where I see riparian area sampling, it's this gray area, or excuse me, brown, terrible in colors. And the arrows there for that south percolation pond was actually the riparian area in the river that they were using to remove solid waste from their process. So that area was all cleaned up, that entire area. And through confirmation sampling, the soil's all below natural background or at natural background, so we're in good shape there. So that part of the cleanup is complete, to the satisfaction of the EPA and Montana DEQ. So, yep.
Just clarification, so the percolation ponds, did you mention that those pollutants are not making it into the river? On percolation ponds?
Those, the pollutants that were in the percolation ponds, which were primarily barium, that was all removed and put actually in this industrial landfill up here to the north, number 2.
Okay, and so the river currently being tested to making sure that those pollutants are.
So then when I talk about the groundwater plume, that's this hashed blue area. And so that just is a pictorial of the underlying groundwater plume that's contacting spent pot liner in the center landfill. So the west landfill and wet scrubber sludge pond, not the center landfill, sorry. It's making contact with spent pot liner, cyanide's getting into groundwater, and the groundwater is what's migrating to the river and expresses itself in this riparian area as surface water. And my comment earlier was in reference to cyanide, and cyanide concentrations we see there are below a drinking water standard.
Wow.
Yeah.
Matt, what happens when you add houses to the whole region?
Yeah, good question. I think it's a thoughtful process. It involves all those people I mentioned earlier and the EPA and navigating that post cleanup, right? Because you don't really know the site conditions in perpetuity until you've conducted the cleanup, you've implemented institutional controls. One of the things I can get to, we just jump to it. I want to make sure I answer your questions and not.
And Tom has a question.
Well, my question was, why wouldn't you just remove the source of the pollutant or put it in a place that's lined so it can't leach out into the groundwater?
Right.
Take care of it forever.
Yep.
Rather than throw the dice and say, oh, well, it's not polluting now, but who knows 10 years from now?
Sure. So, and that was heavily evaluated during the feasibility study. So when you look at cleanup alternatives for spent pot liner, buried spent pot liner, at this site, the best alternative, the recommended alternative for a proposed plan for cleanup involves installing a slurry wall around these two features, so the west landfill and the wet scrubber sludge pond. This is a clay bentonite mixture, 3 to 4 feet wide, that goes straight down to the aquitard and encompasses the entire site. It prevents the groundwater from contacting the spent pot liner. And that type of remedy has, the slurry wall, has been used at hundreds of sites across the United States. They've got a lot of data on that. We brought in technical experts in April to talk to folks about that. Answering just your question, Mr. McDonald, is why not just take it off? And so one of the issues, well, there's several issues, and I'm not sure if it made it on this slide deck, but let's just get to it. Okay, so just on your question about offsite disposal, so it was, again, evaluated, screened out when we looked at effectiveness and implementability and cost. We talked about it being a RCRA hazardous waste, so it's 500 miles away. Basically, what you're looking at is there's 1.2 million cubic yards of a combination of the spent pot liner itself and the contaminated soil. So you'd have to excavate the 1.2 million yards. Remember, you're excavating in the groundwater table, which does fluctuate, but there'll be times when you're excavating in water. So you're removing the soil. When you expose the buried spent pot liner to air in the presence of water, it generates cyanide and toxic and explosive gases. So there's a risk to workers. And I've said this before, and I've said this in public meetings. Can we mitigate that? Sure. We probably could, but is it an unnecessary risk to the people doing that work? Once you remove it, you then have to set it aside so now you're making your footprint bigger. You're digging a hole, you're maintaining your 3-to-1 slope. This is turning into a pit that you're excavating, putting it in an area on site to treat it. And what I mean by that is you have to make it inert. You have to get it to a point where you can put it in hazardous shipping containers, get it to the rail, and get it on a straight rail car and go 500 miles. That's what the process would look like. And that would probably take, through estimates of the volume, working with Arlington, who's the facility owner. We actually worked with our contractor, CDM Smith, to develop a cost estimate for that, and worked with the facility to say, what are the logistics of that? They recommended it be done by rail, but you're talking about probably a 5-year project that has a pretty significant impact to the community that lives right next to that. At the end of the day, you'd probably get 80% of it. We can't get it all because, again, to the extent that it's contaminated, that the soil's underlying there, it was never lined, it was never a lined pit. And again, you're working in a bathtub essentially. And so you could probably get 80% of it is what I'm saying. You can get most of it. So you're still left with an impact to groundwaters. You'll still have an impact in that footprint to groundwater that you'll have to mitigate some point over time, to your point, right? How do you keep it from going to the river eventually? So you're still in that situation. So it's a combination of all these, the risk to personnel, the risk to transportation, the pretreatment that I talked about, the transportation risks. We all know trains derail, and that happens. That's a risk that needs to be factored in over 5 years. And the cost of this is anywhere from $800 to $1.2 billion, 800,000.
Who would pay for that?
Glencore would pay for it.
But you know what? They can afford that.
Yeah.
They actually can. We only have one river. We only have one Flathead Lake.
I hear you.
I really don't care about Glencore. You know what I
Mr.
care about
McDonald.
is the Flathead River.
Yeah.
Bull trout and ecosystem and
Yeah.
where I live.
Yeah.
And so I don't care if it costs them $1,500 billion. I don't care.
Yeah.
They can afford it.
And I've heard that from many others, and I don't disagree. Ali alluded to this a bit, but I want to emphasize the importance of of CERCLA law, which was established in 1980, codified in the NCP. We're following a process that limits our ability, and for good reason, right? You've created a fund that was meant to clean up sites across the entire nation. If every site came with $1 billion price tag, a few of them would get cleaned up and the rest would not. We'd run out of money. Now, that was the original vision. And again, in this case, we've got a PRP who's going to pay, right? So there's a bit of a caveat there, but baked into that requirement is if you've got competing remedies and they're both deemed protective of human health and the environment, they have the same level of protectiveness, you have to go with the lower cost. And that's in the law. And the PRPs know this. If EPA came out and said, we don't care, we still want you to pay $1 billion, we'll spend the next 5 years in court litigating the issue, and nothing will get cleaned up. That's the concern. Again, I'm trying to be compliant with law. I understand why that was built in there, why competing remedies need to necessarily go with a lower cost. We feel that the remedy that's being proposed, the slurry wall, so this, let me just describe it a bit more. The slurry wall would be installed. There are groundwater wells inside and outside to monitor and maintain an inward gradient. Okay, so we'll be sampling that water to make sure that groundwater is not contacting, it's not picking up cyanide in the future. So we'll know if and when that happens. And there'll also be a treatment facility on the surface so that if there's some breach of that slurry wall, we'll know about it. We'll have the ability to treat water before it's discharged back, removing any cyanide, and then we'll be able to make repairs to the slurry wall as necessary. Yeah. Yeah, we can get to that.
So I'm not quite understanding your remedy. If the slurry wall fails, you're saying you're going to be able to catch all that seep before it hits the river and treat it?
Yeah, we had an interesting conversation, and I am not an expert on slurry wall, but we brought one to our meeting in April. I spent a lot of good time with him, and maybe Gunnar could probably chime in here, but I'll do my best. It's described as a clay bentonite mixture, right? That's fluid. That actually is hydrophilic. It loves water. In fact, it performs better when in contact with water, and to a certain extent, it's self-repairing or self-healing. In a case of an earthquake, which was brought up and has been brought up, what happens if you have an earthquake and the ground shifts? This material actually heals itself. It shifts and reforms and actually kind of becomes even stronger in the presence of movement and fracture. And so that's my best. I'm a chemical engineer. I'm not a civil engineer, but I've listened to this individual talk, and he is very confident in the remedy that's proposed. Now, there's a lot of work left to do. I'm not going to deny it. We have to get through remedial design, and remedial design does more work to better characterize the geology, better characterize the design, and implement a design that's gone through far more detailed analysis than what we're able to do at this point. But as a technology, screened as a technology, and given the fact is this has worked a lot of other places elsewhere, what we do know about the geology, factoring all that in, we think this remedy will be protective of human health and the environment.
Yeah, you still didn't answer my question.
Okay, sorry.
So let's just say there is a failure of the wall. What then?
Yeah, so what I was going with that was to say that when we talk about failure, we don't see catastrophic failures in these. So when I talk about failure, you may see, and where these normally fail, what I'm told, or not fail, but they start to leak, is that where this keys into the aquitard. So it's at the very bottom. The slurry wall contractor we've talked to says that they'll know that when they install the slurry wall. So meaning that they can detect if that's not properly keyed, they can fix it on site before they even leave the site. So let me just say that in that case, what I'm trying to explain or describe is what we think failure might look like. And the biggest part of all these things, right, is in any design is you learn from others, right? How have these failed in the past? Under what mechanisms? What steps can we take to prevent that from happening here? And we have every intent of incorporating all of that good engineering practice and lessons learned into the design and build of this. Having said all that, right? If we somehow miss something and there is a failure through monitoring, we will know it. Go ahead.
I know, but then what?
Well, I'd like to point out that when we say the word failure for these slurry wall designs, even failure means the water level in the landfill is raising up and getting back into contact with the bottom of the waste. But that would happen at such a low rate, a failed slurry wall not keyed into this aquitard would still be 90% effective. And the volume of water that we'd have to pump out and treat would be so small, we only have to do that seasonally. That's our kind of our worst case possible. So even if it fails, it still will be like at least 90% effective.
You're talking about pumping out of the pit, essentially.
Pumping out of this box, we're pretty much going to be like, think of it as a clay box with clay on top, clay on all four sides.
When you
and
talk
clay at the
about
bottom.
going down, how deep is this wall that you're talking about putting in down to the?
About 100 feet and anywhere like 60 to 130 feet, but 100 feet on average.
And it's gonna be 4 or 3 feet, 2 feet wide, is that?
Yeah, about three wide. Yeah.
And how do you do that?
With a excavator, a long,
A real long
excavator.
excavator? And how does that not collapse?
That you add the clay slurry in it, the bentonite slurry, as you excavate along. So you excavate in panels that's got this clay slurry. So as you're digging, it's digging the dirt out from the underneath there, but this clay slurry is keeping the hole, the trench open. And then at the end, you add more bentonite into it to seal it up and make it more of a solid than a wet slurry.
And who does the monitoring then?
That would be the responsibility of CFAC. They'll retain, and I've got a nice slide here that talks about that footprint, that the area in which we talked about that's being proposed for the remedy with the slurry wall, they would maintain ownership of that section of the property in perpetuity. They would have built into the consent decree responsibilities to perform institutional controls, which include monitoring, and then reporting to the agencies in perpetuity.
So it's self-reporting of failure?
Say again?
It's self-reporting?
This is with heavy oversight of EPA and Montana DEQ.
Hi, James.
Yeah, Tom caught some of my comment. I was looking at the back sheet you had in the back there. Did EPA check to see how cleanup was done at other aluminum sites? And then I noticed on the Reynolds aluminum smelter in Longview, you mentioned, and it gets into Vice Chair's comment, a semi-permeable reactive barrier treated groundwater. This type of barrier was evaluated at CFAC, but a slurry wall was found to be more practical given the geology. I'm gonna just basic questions. One is, could you explain a semi-permeable reactive barrier? And then the other is, explain a slurry. I think I know, but I don't know. So I'm not a chemical engineer nor a geologist or any of the others. So, but I'm just wondering what made Longview different than the site that we're discussing.
Well, Longview had a different geology. It had kind of alluvial sediments, fine grained sands and stuff like that. Whereas up at CFAC, it's glacial till. So it's got rockier boulders and clay mixed together and things like that. So the thought was at Longview that as the plume comes out, you could put in this semi-permeable, means it allows groundwater to flow through it, and it's filled with a media that would attenuate the contaminants and clearing the cyanide out. We looked at that at CFAC as well, but CFAC, besides having the cyanide, it also has fluoride and arsenic that would have to be treated. And those are different chemicals that have different media. So you really couldn't come up with a mixed thing that could treat all those chemicals at once because it requires different chemicals to treat. And your question of what a slurry is, it's kind of like mud. Mud is a slurry. It's water and soil mixed together, and it's in a liquid form, so it kind of flows. But as I said earlier, they would add more dry clay to it and eventually turn it to a clay solid.
Yeah, the other thing I noticed, to follow up, Mr. Chair, the other one that was meant, well, you mentioned a bunch of them, but the other one that caught my attention was a Kaiser aluminum smelter in Spokane. The reason that comes to my mind is my grandmother worked there in the war. You know, so a lot of these aluminum, I noticed the dates, 1940, Vancouver smelter, Spokane, Tacoma, you know, Reynolds, in Longview, you know, a lot of these directly or indirectly have, you know, our battles in World War II and Korea and such. And so, yeah, that one jumped out just for that.
You know, and one of the things I want to mention, you know, as we, as a region, developed this proposed plan, it involved 6 months of heavy involvement from EPA headquarters. And that's one of the perspectives that a headquarters review gives you, is what has been done across the nation, right? We've got 9, I think, well, maybe it's not 9, maybe I don't remember how many are on that. But there's roughly 8 or 9 former aluminum smelters in the Pacific Northwest. And in every site that had buried spent pot liner, they left it there. And it's for the same reasons we've outlined in this feasibility study, and the risks to health, right? The removal, the cost, not just the cost, but all the process. And the reasons that were outlined there are the same reasons they left it at those sites. So that was something done afterwards, right? We're just checking to make sure, is this remedy consistent with other sites? And I think it is.
Sure.
Go ahead, Bill.
Were they all adjacent to a river?
You know, that's the other thing is most of these aluminum smelting is a heavily energy intensive process, right? You're taking in electricity. This one was built right after the Hungry Horse Dam was constructed in 1953. All those sites are near hydroelectric sources of power because they're so energy intensive.
No,
And yes,
I
in
know
most
they are,
cases
but
they are
they
right
adjacent
on the
to a
river. Yes,
Yeah.
Columbia River.
All
Yeah.
of them are?
Most of them are. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a second cousin who worked his whole career at this plant.
Wow.
He's dead now. Died prematurely.
So I guess in the interest of time, we've covered the proposed remedy. I've shared this with you just about site features and how, you know, the site was approached from a different, although I didn't explain it, but different decision units. We talked about the primary concern here is impacts to groundwater, although there are some surface features that as part of the cleanup would be, the plan is to clean those soils up and then landfill those on site. And those are some that contain PAHs or polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, some heavy metals in some of these areas. And those are all part of the cleanup plan as well.
Where's the primary groundwater coming from? Where's the direction of flow? Is it coming off of the Cedar Creek?
The groundwater flows generally north to south and a bit from the kind of northwest down to southwest. So in this, you see some of these, we had a better one of groundwater modeling, I think, in the following slides, but that's the area, generally north to south and a bit northeast to southwest, if you will, or northwest to southeast.
The primary source of the groundwater is infiltration into Teakettle Mountain, which is behind the site. It's the creeks themselves are losing streams, so but they don't
In reaches?
Yeah, and Cedar Creek's downgraded of all the sites. So there is a Cedar Creek overflow ditch that's above it, and as part of the record decision, we are looking at lining that ditch so we limit any kind of infiltration into the plume.
Was there any revegetation of the mountain part of this?
As part of the cleanup? No. The remedies contained to the site boundaries.
I remember that operation just killed the entire foliage of that mountainside. So.
Sure. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, just to kind of chime in on that, you know, thinking of Kellogg area, going through there in the seventies in a Dodge station wagon from Quinault Res to here, and it was, and look how many years it's taken just, I don't know if they've actively replanted it or not, but it's taken a long time, did they? Yeah, for that to even begin to look like a mountain that we're familiar with in Western Montana. But the other thing is I picked up another sheet that's stated, can a Superfund be redeveloped? And it's kind of interesting to consider what those possibilities might be. I looked at the back and I had been on the Upper Clark Fork Advisory thing for that. And I have been up in this area where these places are, and I hadn't really thought about, like the Forge is the one that I'm thinking of. There's a hotel there that I stayed at. And to think of what are the things that these businesses have, the assurances that they have that, the water that they're giving their customers is good, and, the ground is good, the golf course, those type of things. I'm just wondering, is that, I guess all these different EPA sites are bombing together. I'm also remembering Judy Martz used the silver bullet to deal with Libby. And I don't know that that's still kind of going on today. So this is almost, these EPA sites almost become, because every one of the ones that you mentioned here on your example sheet, the groundwater is being treated, it's ongoing, wastewater treatment is ongoing, groundwater is captured and treated, study is underway, site cleanup will follow. I mean, so this is Glencore and these companies, okay, here's $700 million to settle our bribery lawsuit with the Department of Justice. Here's however many British pounds to satisfy the UK lawsuit. And for that, I'm just wondering, we know they have enough money, but sorry for my kind of rambling, but I guess my concern is, one thought that kind of, the vice chair made me think, why can't we have at least a tribe have part of this monitoring? If you got, DEQ and you got the EPA, I mean, I believe the tribes have very competent staff, and we've been proven to hire the appropriate staff that we need to do these type of jobs. Why wouldn't we have the inclusion of potential tribal monitor in this process as well? So that was something that came from Tom's comments, but sorry for rambling. Pick what you want to answer, but maybe that last one the most.
No, thank you, Ms. Steele. That's a good point. I think we're definitely open to that. I think as we move forward in the process and we start to contemplate institutional controls and what monitoring looks like exactly, frequency, responsibilities, those kinds of things, I don't see why we wouldn't be open to that conversation. And I think that's a good point. And I don't see why the tribe couldn't play a role in that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Thank you, James, for bringing that up. Trust but verify. And not that they don't trust the EPA, they certainly don't trust Glencore or any of the people who created the mess there, especially when they're self-reporting. So yeah, trust but verify would be great. I look forward to that as we work to clean up the Elk River and protect the Kootenai. How we can be part of that process and part of that work, but also be able to, trust the work's going to happen there if we ever get to that point. And we need to verify it. We need to verify it. We have a protectable interest. It's our Aboriginal territory. We have subsistence use rights here, access rights. And so most definitely, yeah, Matt, make us part of the process.
Yes, sir.
Part of the future.
Will do. Okay. I think I've used up a lot of time, so again, as I started with, this is a lot of information to cover in, 8 years worth of work. So I want to be respectful of your all's time and just say that I'm willing to come back here at any time, and I'll leave my contact information. I'll leave the fact sheets for you to review some more, and if we need additional follow-up, I'm happy to be there. So.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does one of you work with Stone Container? Yeah. Oh,
Kelly does.
Ellie does, okay.
Yeah, that was the first presentation, was the Smurfit Stone container.
Oh, okay.
Matt, one last question.
Yes, sir.
If a developer gets involved, what kind of value is going to be put on these sites?
Can you say that one more time? I didn't catch the first part.
I say if a developer gets involved to think about residential housing, what kind of value is going to be put on these sites compared to other bare ground?
It's a very good question, Mr. Chairman. I think we'll have to watch closely as this unfolds in conversations with the prospective purchaser and the current landowner, which is CFAC, how that all evolves. We've been asked to be part of those conversations. I've asked for key meetings with those stakeholders, the local zoning officials, members of the community, and to start having those conversations and try to, as we all do in this business, to make our thinking visible and be clear about what it is we're trying to do and make our thought processes visible. I'm going to ask the same of them. And to be honest with you, Mr. Chairman, I don't know how that's going to play out, but I know we will be at the chair and we will make sure that the remedy is protective and remains that way in perpetuity, and whatever controls we have to put in place, we will. So, but much to come on that, and I can't speculate on the details. I really don't know. Yeah.
Well, thank you much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. Thank you very much.
The last item on your agenda is rescheduled for later this month. That Ralph Foster one.
What? Oh, yeah, that was the other day. But we do have, issues that the council wanted to talk about this morning that we didn't get to, and we can do that now if you'd like. And James, Bing, Martin, Danielle, Jennifer, and Lynn all talked about having things to talk about. I didn't hear any executives, so. James, you were first on my list.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to be I made travel on Thursday to go to NAIHC in Florida. And then later that day, I found out I was invited to go to the White House to attend an event for Two-Spirit LGBT Indigenous folks. I was invited to attend that. So that's on the 23rd. So if something comes up in DC that you need me to go to while I'm there, just feel free to put me on it and I will go to it. I've never been to the White House. So a friend of mine from Navajo, he works with the Navajo Council, Native Navajo Housing Authority. I've known him for years, and he messaged me asking me my biography and stuff like that, and didn't tell me what. He said, I can't tell you what, because it's, we're trying to get it worked out. So, so I changed my travel to go to DC and I should be back. I'll leave Monday, the 21st, 24th. The event is on Tuesday that afternoon and then I come back on the 26th, so I should be in council on the 27th. So I'll miss chair's meeting, council on the 25th and coming back on the 26th. But like I said, if you have something, anyone or the staff or anybody that has something to go somewhere in DC, now I can do it while I'm out there. I don't have any problem with that. So
So not the 23rd that you said earlier.
yeah, if I said the 23rd, I didn't mean.
Okay.
Yeah, 24th is when I leave. 24th, 25th, 26th. All right, thank you.
Thank you, James.
And I wanted to say, we were able to cancel everything without no problem. And
Thanks, Jen.
we also looked at the hotel that you picked at DC, and that was our cheapest hotel that we've ever.
Yeah, I'm good at
Got it.
finding cheap hotels in DC, so.
Yeah, so then I was gonna say, next person going to DC.
Yeah, it was like, yeah,
Next person
it
going
was
to
like
DC.
$300 for,
Yeah, yours was like only 189 or 179 compared to normal 500.
yeah, I know there was tons of them. I'm like, no, I'm going for this $100 something. Yeah, I'll tell you what it's like after I come out of there.
Bing, I had you up second on the list.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Say, I just wanted to thank, you, Mr. Chair, and Danielle, Martin, Patricia, and, Jordan last night for coming down to our meeting down there in Arley, and, really appreciate you, answering the questions about the, enrollment issue that they're talking about, you know, and I already thanked John for sending me a text on the Initiative 193. But I just wanted to thank you guys for doing that for us.
Thank you, Bing. Yes, Martins will wait. Danielle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just had a tribal member reach out in regards to payroll. I think I was able to work out the issue with Greg Spar, but it doesn't sound like it was actually a payroll issue. It's the personal action form. Person was hired on the 3rd. Personal action form was completed not on the 3rd, not until the 6th, and it was still not received to payroll on the 10th. So we've got a person hired, afraid they're not going to get paid until the 2nd of July and working for almost a month without a paycheck. I think we're able to expedite that, but this should just be a natural process where they get paperwork in on time and paid in a timely manner. So I just wanted to bring it up because I'm hoping it's not happening across the board, but it sounds like there was a few people that were having some personnel issues still. And then KCC is tomorrow, so if anybody can go up to Kootenai Culture Committee tomorrow, I'm not gonna be able to make it up there. Headed out of town, but I will be on Zoom Thursday. And then I think I know what I want to do down there or what the community and I've discussed doing down there with the remainder of that money and maybe working with tribal health to get a shower and a washer dryer unit into the Anita Map building. So I'm gonna hopefully start working with Greg and tribal health and SKMM or whomever it is. I'm sure they'll get me in the right direction to get that project started. That's all I've got.
Sounds good. Hey, Martin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was just an update on my passenger rail authority meeting. I'll just do it next time I'm in council. I had to leave early for my daughter's appointment in Missoula, so sorry I didn't let you know. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin.
Okay, so I just wanted to provide a little update about what I've been doing. Last week, I was in Cherokee, North Carolina for the National Congress of American Indians Mid-Year Convention. And while I was there, I was able to provide testimony and advocacy for the food distribution program to the FDA, or not the FDA, the USDA. And the White House Council on Native American Affairs was looking for tribal leaders to interview, to talk about sovereignty and trust responsibilities and co-stewardship. So they were looking for people to interview because they're creating training materials for federal employees. And so I volunteered to be interviewed for that because I think that's really important. And I think that's a great thing that they're creating training materials for federal employees using the words of tribal leaders. And let's see, so there was that. And then the week before that, I was on May 29th and 30th, I was working in the satellite voting offices in Sanders County. And even though I'm not from Sanders County, there were no other volunteers, there were no other takers, and I did it because I think it's important for tribal people to be part of the democratic process and to make voting easier and more accessible to tribal members. So I was in Sanders County for 2 days doing that. And then next week, I am going to Billings on the 20th and 21st, and I am going to be there for the Red Shield 8 meeting. And Red Shield 8 is a regional treatment facility for natives in Montana. So I will be part of that effort next week. And then one last thing, I just wanted to say that I did have a tribal member call me yesterday from Arlie, and she had some concerns about our tribal Indian preference policy not being followed and a lack of transparency in our tribe regarding non-member hires. And I wanted to bring that to the council's attention, that I am getting calls about that. Lem Lemsh.
Red Shield 8 for the treatment center, I think as a group, we're still undecided. We didn't have a full group, I think, when we had the discussion about whether we want the treatment center here or not. And I think before that happens next week, maybe we should have a little further discussion on that. That way the opinion of the council is represented there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the council. I have a couple updates here. I just wanted to have a short discussion. You know, as many of you guys know, I've been bringing up a lot of social service issues. And what really concerns me is last week I seen on the court docket the 2 tribal member boys that I mentioned are getting sent to Texas and Utah. These are brothers, okay? Now, mind you, these are brothers that have never been separated. What concerns me is, from what I understand, the father of these 2 young men has stepped up. He stepped up and he's in a place in his life where he can take responsibility for his children. And our very own social services department is not giving him due process to do that. He's expressed on numerous occasions that he does not want the tribes to pour any more resources into this because he's ready to take his boys. And the staff is not responsive to him at all. And it's concerning because of all of the complaints that we continue to receive about this department and how the staff are treating our members. People are now afraid to step up and request services from us. We need to take a close look at this, people. We really do. This is continues to be an issue that I just feel that overlooked. Okay. we are leaders. We need to start making, we need to start making those tough decisions about how we are to make sure that these types of services are being provided to our people. We need to be more cognizant. We need to be watching. Because if we don't, then we find ourselves in these situations with these two young men. Little young men's getting sent to Texas. Can you imagine? Texas. You're being away from your family, you're being away from your fellow native cousins and the environment that you're used to, and sending them to an unknown institution that we ain't gonna see. This young man is not gonna be able to see those beautiful mountains till he's 18 years old. And I just want to continue to bring this to the council's attention, and I'll continue to do it. I think it's really important because those young people, they have no voice once they get in that system, and they're not given a fair chance at life. So I just want to just quickly mention that, and I will continue to bring this up. But here's what I would like to see. Okay. I would like to see a staff member from the prosecutors or the defender's office, perhaps mail in, to take a look at this, to make sure that due process to the parents is being given before these kids get shipped off. I think that's fair to ask. I don't think that's too much to ask. So I'll just leave it at that, Mr. Chairman and members of the council. I hope you can follow up with that for us. And item number 2 that I would like to discuss is, it was just brought to my attention this afternoon that we had one department under the facilities and maintenance that is required to do a time clock with a thumbprint. Okay. They feel that they're singled out. I have to agree with them, because if we're going to do it for one department, we do it for all. And it was my understanding that it was the ADP system addresses this specific issue. That's why we have everybody doing ADP. I don't think it's fair that we just have a group of people within the tribal organization doing this kind of clocking, especially those that have been with the tribes for a number of years and have created a good work ethic, and they do good work for us. And then a decision like this is handed down from somebody that really doesn't really monitor the department. So anyway, thank you.
Good, Jen.
I just wanted to do a follow-up to Lynn's comment. I agree with him about having an additional layer of oversight, scrutiny about decisions that involve kids, because they're the most vulnerable people, and they're the only people in our population who truly cannot speak for themselves. And I think along those lines, I think as we always try to do better as a tribe, I think it would be a good idea to develop some way that we can ask kids about the services they are receiving that are designed to protect them, and get their input on some of these services. Because I don't know if we've ever done that. Have someone come in and ask them about the services that they are receiving, or people who recently aged out of those services, foster care, or or even tribal ed. Any services that we provide to children, we don't ask the children, we don't ask the youth about the services they are receiving. And I believe that they deserve a voice. I believe that they deserve a voice in how and what kinds of services they get, and how services move forward, and how services can be improved. Thank you.
Thank you all. That's today. We have a motion? James. Motion to adjourn. Thank you all.